words of wisdom with us and our students. VC sir, over to you.
Yeah. Good morning, one and all. First of all, I would like to compliment for joining of Professor Eric Charles for this particular orientation session to the MBA students who has joined here past in couple of days back. And I had also opportunity to interact with them sometimes back. And I also thanks to IBS School Dehradun, especially Dr. Ankita Barma, Dr. Raghavan Sharma, Dr. Santanu Rai, Dr. Sanjeev Malviya, very fruitfully engaging the students in their initial phases. And I wish more and more time should be given to Professor Eric Charles to interact with the students. I remember a couple of years back when I visited one of the US University campus, Michigan, in Houghton, and then I visited the Ann Arbor campus of Michigan University, and I was interacting with the students there. I found one student was doing his, rather her integrated MBA degree along with the MS degree. So I was just interacting, how come you are earning 2 degrees, 2 master degrees same time? So she explained me very nicely. And now the education system has evolved to an extent where students even at a master degree level can do 2 parallel specialization. In one particular area, they will be taking the knowledge of their core strength. Another area, they will be also understanding the concept and knowledge of management. And so such kind of the professionals are going to be the real life professionals for the modern 4.0 education and 5.0 industry. And they can serve the global society. And I'm very happy this morning Professor Eric is here, and he is going to talk with you of the his experiences. Country like United States of America, which is a very vibrant country on this planet, and giving opportunity from the global students to coming and learning and utilizing their potential for well-being of this globe. So I am very, very thankful to Professor Eric and the efforts of the department to inducting him in this system. And we are very fortunate that he has took out his time from his very busy schedule and going to interact with you. And so more and more time goes to Professor Eric. So it is up to you, Professor Eric. The students are very eager and very enthusiastic and positive to hear you and welcome you with this audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll just take a couple of minutes, Mr. Eric. May I request Dr. Roy, so please share a couple of words of wisdom with our audience and our guests, please. Dr. Roy, can you hear? You please unmute yourself, Dr. Roy.
Yeah. Good morning from India, and of course, good evening at your place in California. And so it's great that you have joined and you'll be talking on. So I'm very thankful to Eric Charles to join and talk about perspectives of global marketing. And that's a very important topic for any business graduate, because world is, economies are not confined to one particular state or nation. It's now worldwide. Import, exports, and I've been a student of and practicing manager in international logistics for a long time. So global marketing is a very good talk and very good topic to discuss. So we are very thankful and very thankful to our Dr. Raghavendra Sharma ji to organize this meeting for our students. And this will give them a great exposure to what are the implications and how do you take this movement forward. So when you are producing something, you have to sell that thing, because there's no free lunch in business. If you're making something, that must have some customers. So how do you approach their customers across the world, and how do you channelize, how do you make these channels work, how to market throughout the world? What are the perspectives of global marketing that are important? And these are extremely important dimensions for any business student. So it's great that you have taken off your time and an evening time for you, and it's a daytime for us to talk to our students. And I'm thankful again to you to join us. So the floor is now open to Mr. Eric Charles to take this discussion forward.
Sir, before it is open to Mr. Eric, let me have the privilege to invite Dr. Ankita Verma to introduce formally the guest, Mr. Eric Charles. I'm sorry, Mr. Eric. But I think your profile is a very good and wonderful profile to be read in front of the students. So it will be good for them to know that who they are talking. Dr. Ankita, over to you to introduce formally and begin the session, please.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. I must agree to what you are saying, sir. As I was going through his profile, it is very impressive. So thank you. So today, it's a privilege to introduce Mr. Eric W. Charles, Executive Director, Sales Global, as an accomplished professional with 3 decades of experience in successful marketing and sales operation. His expertise ranges from multinational enterprise firm to small startups, allowing him to craft recommendations tailored to varying market environments, available employee talent pool, and corporate goals. Eric serves as a subject matter expert on the interlocking fields of revenue intelligence, revenue performance, and revenue optimization. He helps companies drive expansion and growth by better aligning messaging, tactics, focus, and motivational incentives with achievable strategic and tactical goals. He has been integral at multiple startups with successful exits, as well as at multinational firms including Canon, Sun Microsystem, Exactly, and Apple. Eric has an extensive consulting and research background, focusing on key measures for sales and marketing roles, identification of focal points for improvement in customer acquisition and retention, as well as the design and communication of improved incentive plans with strong line of sight metrics. He is an early stage investor and serves as an advisor for venture funds and their portfolio companies. Most recently, he served as a chief marketing officer and chief evangelist for Exactly. Prior to that, he was the VP Business Operations for Exactly Japan expansion, where he built and tailored a complete local go-to-market organization, established a localized marketing operations, and onboarded implementation and customer success team members. He worked closely with key partners such as Japan Cloud, Salesforce, Oracle, and Microsoft to drive Exactly growth in this market. He was regularly featured in the Globe press on subjects such as market expansion, incentive pay, and sales management. Now I would request Mr. Eric W. Charles to please grace the stage. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that kind introduction. I do appreciate it. As I get the sharing going here on the PowerPoint so that it's there. There we go. I also want to thank you once again for inviting me to speak at the school. I'm honestly very, very honored by this opportunity, and I've always enjoyed some of the interactions both with the students and the faculty, and also the ones that will come in via email afterwards, which I will also welcome. I wanted to start with just, had to do at least one proper reference of what is global marketing. And it's very simple. It's taking your product across borders so you can make more money. And it's interesting because we put marketing and sales in almost the same categories nowadays. More and more, what I have observed is companies over and over again are seeing that marketing and sales interact so closely. So whenever we talk about marketing for placement and promoting our products, we should also be thinking about who's actually going to be selling it in the same way we're thinking about who's going to be buying it. And as my introduction covered, I have helped companies move out there. For several companies, I've moved them into the United Kingdom. I've brought them into Australia. I've brought them into Canada and into Mexico, and also, into Japan most recently. At the same time, I'm currently working with both some venture funds out of India and Israel who are looking to bring their small startups into the United States market. So I'm flipping the conversation, not just talking to US-based companies of how to expand outside of the US, but helping international companies, non-US companies, the best ways to come in to the US market. So please don't think that my perspective of global or international is only US centric, and I welcome questions in that area. But since this is a marketing class, we should start with the classic 4 Ps: product, place, promotion, and price, right? That's the first thing you typically learn in marketing. What is the product you're going to sell? Where are you going to sell it? How are you going to promote it? And what are you going to charge for it? We all know that's the first thing you need to do whenever you're coming up with something. But if we start adding the local market conditions, it gets a little more interesting. We have to start thinking about our competition. We have to think about the technology. We have to think about the local economy, the culture, and the political legal ramifications. So this is how I look at things from a startup. I'm a venture partner with Companion, and we go into those areas. I'm part of several actually investment funds where I try to keep an eye on our portfolio of companies, and I'll hit them on the 4 Ps all the time. But when you go international, we double this. We go each one of these. Now we have competition in the local market. Just because you might have an amazing advantage in your country, will you have the same advantage when you shift over? Will the technology availabilities change? What's the difference in economies? Yes, there's a global economy, but there are also local economies. The economy in the United States is not necessarily the economy in Mexico or Canada, and they're next door to each other. The economy in the United Kingdom does not match the US perfectly. There are different pieces. The cultural impact cannot be discounted either. And by culture, there is both the business culture and the employment culture, and that is how things are sold, but also how you're going to hire. The governmental factors might be things you don't anticipate. Something I've dealt with, I was talking to an Israeli startup last week, and I had to remind them that not only do they have to follow the laws of the United States as they bring their product in, but there are also laws, in their case, in the state of California. And the laws of California might be different than the laws in Texas. So the US made up of 50 states. Each state has its own political, legal ramifications when you come in. Then you start getting to the infrastructure aspects of things and the structure of distribution. So with that high-level overview that I'm sure you're already covering in your marketing class of the 4 Ps and how to expand on that, along with Porter's 5 forces and the like, let's get into the first steps on your market research. Demographics. Are the buyers the same? So let me take Exactly as an example. Exactly sells software that is used by sales teams, is used by companies to manage their sales teams. Now, one of the key buyers of the software in the US, if I go searching for titles of who to sell to, I look for people who work in sales operations or revenue operations. When I got to Japan, that title isn't really being used. They don't have somebody in sales operations. They don't have a revenue operations department. So all of a sudden, I had to rethink who my buyer would be. I had to back up into the head of sales or somebody in the finance department. So even assuming that the titles are the same, the roles are the same, the organization chart of 2 parallel companies might not have the same titles. That impacts your promotion. That impacts how you sell it. Obviously, does your company and product fit into their culture? The variable pay world that I have worked in, for example, in commission pay, 100% commission, sales reps, doesn't necessarily exist in Germany. Very little pay is at risk in Germany. Same idea. Then we get into the economy, regulations, and then costs. Will be cheaper or more expensive to do business. And those costs could be employment costs, or they could be tax costs, or they could be other things. So finally, and then that competitive landscape in the expansion area. So this is where your first market research should be, as you start thinking about where should we expand into and where can we sell into. Let's go a little bit further in the barriers to entry, if you don't mind. And this is where I'll start thinking about language, distance, and demographics. Actually, I should pause there. I don't know if we have a chat window or if any. I'm more than happy to take questions in mid-conversation if desired, by the way. So if anything does come up, somebody interrupt me, please do. Or if I go too quickly over a topic, I should have said that as well. So let's talk about language, distance, and demographics. So in the barriers, the language is obvious. You know, amazing thing is in this entire conversation, it's all taking place in English. If I go into the United Kingdom, English is very easy. If I go to Australia, it's not a problem. Canada, the same thing. Mexico, it's about 50-50, but it's very easy to find partners in Mexico who speak English. Plus, I have partners who speak Spanish, and I speak some Spanish. Going into Germany, English is common, but so is German. Obviously, French, the French will speak English, but won't necessarily admit it to me. The barrier of distance. It is 2:30 in the morning for me right now. I'm actually in Cincinnati, Ohio right now, where I'm speaking at a conference in a few hours. So, but that's a short flight for me. India to the US is obviously a slightly longer flight, has a different time zone shift. Matter of fact, a great exercise I went through in international business classes where we each had to represent a different country, and we could only hold a meeting that was business hours for the majority of us. And so finding our way around those distances are key. And then the demographics. And demographics, again, is the economy and the buyers, which is why when the US does outward expansion for our international business, where do we go? We go to Canada first. Canada's great. They call their currency a dollar, even though I have to have an exchange rate. English is spoken, plus French in Montreal, and it's easy. United Kingdom is typically the second place that US companies will expand to. And then finally, Australia is a third one that they'll do. That is because it's the lowest barrier to entry. It's the closest thing to match the culture, to match the language, and to match the business styles. And I bring this up because as part of the research, this is what you want to start capturing of what can you come into. Because when we talk about language, it's more than just a simple translation. I've shared this before, but these are some examples. These are some photographs and examples I'll bring in from Japan, but I want to bring them in. I'll do a few others. So, you know, just because a word translates doesn't mean that's how it's used. The British use remuneration for total pay, whereas Americans will say total cash compensation. Those two pieces can be in conflict with each other. Salary to some people is all the money you earn, whereas salary in America is the base pay, but bonus is not considered part of salary, which is where we get total cash compensation. Now, why does that little terminology matter? Well, if I'm trying to hire you and I tell you that your salary will be $100,000 a year, and you think that includes bonus, I might be underpaying you. But if I tell you the salary is $100,000, but the bonus is another $100,000, that's different. So that little language tick could be just enough not to be able to hire the right person. The next part of language is how do you translate your product? If you've created your product for a certain local market, and now you want to bring it into an international market, you need to go through every single piece of text in the product and translate it. Now, you can do that with a variety of tools. There's DeepL, there's Google Translate, there's third-party organizations such as Simplist that will do it for you, and they just kind of switch it back and forth. And I will admit I've used Google Translate extensively in my travels, but I would never use it for a business conversation without using a local person to double check, because a lot of the terms don't come over quite properly. And worse, if you fail at that translation, you're stepping back on your promotion. So if you're trying to sell your product into a new market, but the way you describe your product doesn't fit the local language and the slight edge, you might have a perfect match in meaning, and a smart person will know what you're saying, but it's actually they're going to discount the validity of whatever you're offering due to a mistranslation that can happen from language. And it's more than just the words, it's also how they're applied. This is my favorite example in that, when we talk about closed won is a term used by Salesforce for a deal. So if you're using the Salesforce CRM and you're looking at an opportunity and you sell, your sales rep sells it, they then will tag it as closed won. However, the won is not a word used in Japan for winning a deal. That is used for sports, for sporting events. So instead, you need to shift over that translation to fit. So in this case, in the product, we had to change it to booked was the more correct translation. That's what I mean by when you're doing each of these pieces of examination, you want to step back. And guess what? Once again, the tip is you want to use a local person to help you. And I'm going to keep on emphasizing the need that if you're going to expand in an international market, you need an international person to be your ally to help you out. That gets into building a local team. In my case, I hired 8 Japanese. First, I found a very good country manager. So Fukuma was my partner. And he was the first person I hired. I hired him remotely over Zoom, several conversations through advisory services. And then he and I partnered to hire each additional person in the organization. And so helped keep me from making significant mistakes, from either underpaying somebody who we really wanted, overpaying somebody more than they're worth. He also helped me understand what types of people we would need in the company, what types of experience that would help, and people that would have the right network connections to make it happen. That building a local team is how you can then go back and have somebody look at these language issues that I was just bringing up and say, you thought you did this right, but here's what still doesn't quite work as we go into this marketplace. So in my opinion and in my experience, the best way to do it is you build a local team, but you bring in one subject matter expat. I was introduced as a subject matter expert, but the expatriate, which in my case, I moved to Japan. When I opened up our office in the United Kingdom, I shipped over Erica Bake, who worked for me in the marketing team, and she helped lead the marketing team in our London office. I also sent a person over to Amsterdam to open up our Northern Europe, and I sent one person to Australia to open up an Australian office. But every other hire in Australia was an Australian. Every other hire in Europe was a European. In each case, I hired local talent, but they were backed by a subject matter expat that came from my home, from my company. And I did that at more than one firm, and that's how we were able to successfully expand each time. And it kept us from making any mistakes in the local markets and being able to leverage local network connections. So with that, as we go deeper into the demographics, this is where we have to worry about things like hiring and firing laws. So garden leave is a term in the United Kingdom. If someone leaves the company, they typically are paid for a few months. They're paid to go work in the garden and not take another job. In Germany, it's workers' councils and unions, and the same as France. Those are different organizations you have to negotiate with when you're putting together an organization. The variable pay culture, you hear me talking about, variable incentives. I'm a firm believer of it. I come from the startup software world, where the use of equity and stock options has always been very, very popular. Here's the issue. If you're going to have all those options, some countries, it's not as easy to grant people options as others. You might have to do different types of sharing plans and understanding how can you give someone an equity stake in the firm, which is what you might be doing back in your country, but are you allowed to do it in the country you're expanding into? And what are the tax implications of that? Next, availability of the profiled employee that's been successful. Now, this one, and I'm talking to MBA students here, but even in the US, we sometimes go back to, hold it, do we absolutely have to have a university degree for this particular job? Or are we looking for an associate's degree, which is a 2-year degree in the US in a technical skill? Or what else do we need to be able to do a hire? University degrees are not as common in the United Kingdom, for example. So if you suddenly do a job placement where you say bachelor's degree required or university degree required, that might keep you from being able to hire effectively. At the same time, you want to make sure which degrees are comparable across different places. And when you think about the profiles of your current company and who's been really successful, do they fit? And then on the buyer side, what are the demographics of the companies that like to buy your product? And do they exist in the new marketplace that you're going into? Certain geographic areas will typically have a different concentration of types of firms. In California, there's 2 known markets, really. Los Angeles market and the Bay Area market. That's what most people know. San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles. San Francisco Bay Area is high-tech manufacturing, high-tech software predominantly. Los Angeles is the entertainment industry and defense contractors. Those are 2 very different corporate entities to go sell into. And depending on what product you have created, what product you are launching, what product you're bringing in, you need to understand Los Angeles might be an amazing market for you, or it might be a horrible market for you, depending upon what you are selling. And knowing what those concentrations of company types are and how to identify them and bring them is going to be important as part of your market research. And that's where I've seen that one fail for some companies where they try to sell into, again, like the Los Angeles market. They can't understand why they can't find the companies because it's more service organizations. And again, defense and entertainment. So let's talk about wages. If you're hiring, what are people paid? This has been the average wages in Japan flat for over 30 years. This is important to us, both from a hiring perspective, but also for marketing our software, since our software is based on compensation. And if there hadn't been any changes on that, what's that impact on it? And then their work environment. So turnover, dissatisfaction, employee environment. Now, why would I want to look into that in an expansion market? Well, this could either tell me I might have products that can reduce turnover. I might have a product that deals with pay, or I might be able to get some amazing young employees to come into my company because I'm offering something more interesting than what the local employers are offering. And yes, you can see I'm a huge believer in what you can do with the right talent that you can bring into your firm, and the better talent you can bring in. And finally, one I'm always like to track is Gallup International runs a workforce engagement survey, and it's done every year, and you can break it down by nation. And I really do recommend looking into it. One, it's the fact that workforce engagement is so low. So the US is at 34%, and that means 34% of the workforce is actively engaged at work. And that's a horrible number until you realize that Japan was only at 5%, China at 17%, Korea at 12%, Eastern Europe at 21%, Western Europe at 11%. And now this is a couple of years ago, but going into that survey data will also help you as you're building out your team, building out your operation, and building out how to come in, which takes us even deeper into looking at the local economy as part of the market research. So, at one point, this is what I was looking at when I was trying to determine where our next expansion should be, which is the software revenue market share, as in what countries are buying software or what regions are buying software, because that's what I've been working in for most of my career for the last 20 years is software. And this was actually came out from Gartner. And this is a great way to be able to look at it of who buys versus who sells as you're going into it. It's a great hint, a great tip, and it lets you do a little bit better than just throwing a dart. However, just because an area is low on, say, how much they buy, but if you also know it's cheaper to enter into, for example, Latin America, is a good place to go sell into, because we can actually hire for a lower price point, but they still buy plenty. They're closer to the US and north-south orientation, and it's pretty easy for me to find Spanish-speaking workers both within the US and within Latin America to hire into it. So each one of those comes into play. So you want to look at that research. Now, the next is you want to look at your currencies. So I pulled this up this morning, or actually at the airport today. I just wanted to add in the dollar to the rupee, which has been rather flat. Luckily, here, relatively flat since 2023. Knowing where the currency shifts are going is going to be important, because remember, as you're building out your business plan for your international expansion, you have to think about what you're going to price your product at. And you're first going to think about what you can sell it, what you price it for in your local markets, but what can you price it in your expansion market? What are you going to pay to sell that product? Again, wages are going to move with that as well. And how are you going to bring that all back into the books to determine your success rates? And if there's big shifts going on while you're there, that can actually have an impact. Some companies will reset their pricing for international pricing once a year. Some do it maybe once a quarter. It can have a large impact on the business. The stability of the US to the rupee is a good thing. If it's quickly changing, that could mean a constant concern of whether or not you are both profitable or not profitable in your expansion market. So having a feel for what that long-term currency, fluctuations are looking at is going to be important. In the same sense, I like to look at GDP growth. This is a graph I put together of just looking at employee engagement versus GDP growth, which is why I'd started with engagement. It's a good way of seeing it. But also, are you going into a market that's a growing market, or is it a shrinking market? Japan was actually a shrinking market, but we decided it was wide open, so we would go for it. Whereas other places are a massively growing market, and if you can get in early, you want to get there. So anything you can do to be, once again, looking at where is gross domestic product going, to know whether or not, if you can land, how easy the expansion will be. And also, if it's expanding, people are typically more willing to start buying additional products versus the reticence to spend money on anything new right now. Let's talk about local regulations. And I touched on this lightly, but even just employment regulations, expansion regulations, articles of incorporation. If you wish to bring your company into the US, you'll have to have a federal tax ID, but you'll also, for example, have to have a California tax ID. You have to file those various documents. What are the ownership requirements? United Kingdom, we set up a separate corporation. Japan, it's a separate separate corporation. So each nation, there's some differences. Who can open a bank account? Do you need to have a certain percentage of local ownership there? I've run into that in China before, where they wanted to see that you had a Chinese partner who owned a certain percentage of the new entity that you're creating. It varies from nation to nation, and knowing what those regulations are and having local legal representation is going to be critical, so you don't do a simple misstep. To give you an idea, just trying to get a phone number in Japan was a nightmare, because we wanted to get it set up in the sales loft for auto calling, and we had to have a variety of pieces to prove what it was. This took about a month, which slowed down the ability to use the tool of sales loft to do auto dialing, to be calling into people to make calls. Now, I say auto dialing, and what was that going to make you think of is, let's talk about GDPR in Europe. And that gets into promotion. GDPR is the privacy rights across the European Union of how much information you can keep and whether or not you can legally email and or call somebody, depending upon what sort of an interaction you've had. GDPR, if you violate GDPR, you can be fined a lot of money, enough to completely bankrupt your operation. Now, the state of California also has the California Consumer Protection Act, which gives consumers the right to tell you can't call them after a period of time. you have to be very wary of those regulations in the same way what I'm showing you of what it takes to get, say, a license just to be able to get a phone number in Tokyo. Now let's talk a little bit about different cultures as we go into these places. And this is the big risk. And I'm going to back up into some more academic perspective here as we look at this. And that's why I want to bring this. And this has been, that self-reference criterion ethnocentrism is that we all look at things from our own lens, from what we've been raised in, what we've been educated in, what do we see? And the reactions to all these things. And this is as simple as colors used on a business card, and do those colors have a meaning in different countries? Titles and how they're translated. The title of vice president, how does that translate into different languages, and what does it mean in those different languages? Professor Verma introduced me as the chief evangelist, as one of the titles I have held. And people, that really means the person who speaks most on behalf of the company. But evangelist actually comes from a religious term, and that might not be a good title to use in some countries, depending upon what their culture is. And so being able to recognize your own cultural, reactions to things, and then thinking, well, if I have reactions to things in certain ways from my culture, how are my potential buyers or business partners going to react to anything else that I do? And being able to look at that can be very important, which takes me back to Japan and the term "you've got to have wa." And this was a book about American baseball expanding into Japan, and specifically an American baseball player joining a Japanese team. And wa in Japan refers to team spirit. And it infuses everything that they're doing there. Everything is done as a team, to the extent that sales reps don't necessarily get a commission check. They don't get paid for selling. It is a shared bonus across a team of 50 people instead. And there is a lot of work in that. Do not disrupt the culture of the team. Do not disrupt the respect for the older workers within the company or something like that. And that's a vastly different cultural perspective than when I'll admit, practice in the US, which can oftentimes be a, eat what you kill, or, go after or fight as hard as you can. And when those two are going back and forth, you can have an issue, and you need to realize that you've got this different perspective coming into play. Oops, there we go. So the idea would be, now I bring that up, and it's not just for managing the team, it's also the business problem. If you back up and take the definition of the business problem that you're solving in your home country, and the cultural traits, habits, and norms that are involved in that definition, and then redefine that business problem in the foreign country's cultural traits, habits, or norms without making any value judgments. This way, yes. Oh, is there a question from the classroom? Nope. Okay. The microphone got turned on. It suddenly popped up on my screen. So, so redefining the problem from the perspective of the other country can be very effective. And actually, one practice I've used is I've taken members of my team and assigned them a country to research, and I've had them come back and tell me, how would you repitch this product into this country? How would you reflect positively or negatively on this product in this country? How would you be able to capture that so that we can think, do we need to change our marketing tagline? Do we need to change the colors we use? Do we need to change the images that we're putting up on the screen, or what we're putting into a brochure? Are there some aspects of the product that do not actually fit? It's apocryphal, in how it translates. It's, the Chevy Nova. There's an old joke about the Chevy Nova car sold into Mexico. Nova referring, more to a star, but in translated in Spanish, no va means doesn't go. Nobody wants to buy a car that doesn't go. Now, unfortunately, that great joke might not entirely be accurate, but it still serves to describe the challenge or the problem or what we're looking at. So that takes us back to the market research and how deep we can get into the market research. So when I dove into Japan, what did I find? CRM, so tools like Salesforce or HubSpot, was only at about 35%. Salesforce owned 40% of that market. Okay, so that was a small bit of research I was doing because I was going to sell a tool that tied into Salesforce. At the same time, on the variable pay side, most people are on team goals and bonus plans and high attrition. The rest of this, don't worry about it, although you're welcome to take a look at it. But the same idea, I was used to a much higher use of CRM, of Salesforce automation tools. I built tools that sell into people that are using CRM. And all of a sudden I find out they don't have great adoption. I also find out they don't have a lot of individual incentives. So I actually didn't even sell the individual incentive tool in Japan initially. So with all of those, excuse me, that actually got me to actually reduce my forecast, my individual forecast of how successful. And it's actually slowed us down significantly in our initial Japan expansion. So some mistakes were made in that sense. So having the proper research, but from there, start localizing existing content. And by localizing, that meant backing up and not just using a transliteration, but a proper translation where I could work with some local people to rewrite it and rethink it all. And also, obviously, change out the models. As in by models, I mean the images and the people that I had in all of my advertising. I had to find some local customers. I had to start with some US customers, then slowly get into local customers, and then gets into start educating the market. Now, here's an interesting thing. You can't buy press in the United States. You can buy advertising, but you cannot buy an interview. You can in Japan. In the business press, you can pay them to come and interview you. I did that. So much as I'd love to say this picture was from someone being amazed by a release that I sent out to the organization, instead, it was a paid for opportunity that they came in and interviewed. But from that, it actually increased the notice, because once that was done, other people read it and other press came in to do it. And that was through the advice of a local marketing firm that I hired, that they brought me in and we went through that. United Kingdom was the same way. We couldn't buy the press, but we started feeding the local press. We started finding the people that covered our area of business, and we would send them interesting pieces of research and things that we could talk about. And we made ourselves extremely available to do very quick responses. So the UK press is different from the Japanese press. In the UK, they wanted to be able to act quickly on and do an article. So they wanted like a quote. And so we would train up our team that if they called over and said, what can you tell us about this? We made sure they would always have 2 to 3 quick responses that could be put into an article. It gave the reporter a little more color for their publication, and obviously it gave us a little extra lift. Each time we would come in, that was the idea, is get noticed in that press, because the press then drives traffic to your website, because people see your company name, they search for you, they find you, they click. Once someone's on your website, hopefully you've got your website set up to be able to sell more product. So I don't know if I've gone too fast. I don't have a clock in front of me. I'll freely admit it. That QR code will take you to my LinkedIn profile. I'm more than happy to connect with any of you if you have any further questions. That is my email address at Sales Globe. You can shoot me a note there as well. But I'd like to, I guess, open it up for questions at this point, if there are any from the audience.
Dear students, if you have questions, you please raise your hand. You can have the mic over there. It is made available to you in the auditorium. and you can ask your questions. If there is a question, don't keep it to your mind. Meanwhile, they are thinking of it, Mr. Arik, I have just as a curiosity, I have a couple of things. Say, for example, what challenges did you face when dealing with the locals? You mentioned that it is good when you are dealing with the locals, particularly in the expatriate case, when the people are going and working in the different countries. So how did you deal with the locals? Did you find it challenging, or if yes, what type of challenges did you face?
The biggest challenges I faced. So when I took the business in the United Kingdom, I'll take it country by country. United Kingdom was interesting. It was much more sexist than I was expecting in the United Kingdom in that era. I was unpleasantly surprised as I was trying to hire up there a little bit, and I had to be used to that. I did not appreciate it. Not to disparage the UK, but as soon as you bring that, I just remember dealing with that a little bit. And the other thing I'll admit was in the United Kingdom, the drinking at lunch. The US, we don't drink at lunch on the business day, but in the United Kingdom, they were very happy to have a glass of alcohol, which caught me by surprise. Just again, culturally, when down in Australia, when I got in Australia, it was interesting in that when I was working with partners, every time I went into an office of I was working with Price Waterhouse and Accenture at the time as partners to do implementations for me. I was with a different company then. And I found that oftentimes I was dealing with other expats. So I'd be in Australia, I'd go to the Australian office, I'd walk into the Australian office, and it wasn't an Australian that I was dealing with. However, when I got to the companies, they were Australians. Whenever I was talking to the large consulting firms, they weren't. In Japan, the biggest thing that got me is I am used to being able to look at somebody and read their face a little bit. A smile, a nod, an expression. Comparatively, the Japanese culture is a much flatter affect, and you wouldn't get the same reactions that I was used to. Now, mind you, I've seen the same thing in the U.S. To give you an idea, I've spoken around the places, and I remember giving a talk in Dallas, and then 2 days later, I gave the exact same talk in New York. In Dallas, people were reacting as I was speaking. When I got to New York, they were all pretty much silent. I was worried that my pitch for my company and product was completely bombing. But then when it ended, the New Yorkers all came up to me almost in a cluster to start asking me questions and peppering me with questions, but they weren't willing to ask in the room. And that had thrown me off a little bit. And that's where actually I had a New York sales rep who said, "I'm sorry, I should have warned you. That's the New York style. We won't react to your presentation, but if they like it, they'll come and talk to you afterwards." And I told them, I said, "I wish you would have warned me because I was feeling horrible about myself." So that was the main one in Japan, was the difficulty in reading the faces. At the same time, and then in China, I was doing work in China, and that was very interesting. But luckily, in my MBA class, I had a professor from China who would give me a briefing and warned me, it's like, the negotiation doesn't end until you get on the plane to go home. That they will continue to try and renegotiate the deal until you're actually back over the Pacific, flying back to the United States. And luckily I was warned about that, because I remember I had some finished a business deal, shook hands, we all agreed we're setting up contracts. It was down to just paperwork, and then we go out to dinner, and we're halfway through dinner, and all of a sudden it's like, "So I want to talk to you again about the pricing on this part of it." And I'm thinking, hold it, I thought, we're done, we shook hands, we finished. Cultural difference between the two, and getting caught up on that as well. And you can find references, there's books, there's plenty of websites, there's places you can find some of this information. Or again, that's why I can't emphasize enough the value of having locals to help you out.
What experience do you have, if there is any, when you deal with the Indian counterpart? You mentioned that you were dealing with a couple of Indian companies also.
So I'm just now dealing with Indian companies coming to the U.S. and it's a lot of fun. And I was asked to buy a venture fund, and that's what they said, that to do that direction. It's funny though. I have to state that I have reported into Indians multiple times. Calida Software, my first big software startup, was co-founded. The founder was Chris Cabrera, who's an American of Colombian descent, and with Satish, his Indian partner. So with the Indian companies, what I'm finding is they have got an excellent product knowledge, an excellent attack and approach, but their marketing is still a little weak in how to actually describe it to the buyer. They can describe, and again, my focus is software, an excellent description of the software's capabilities and functionality, but the need to then say, hold it, as a marketer, this software will help you do this. As a financial controller, this software will do this for you. And that's actually what I've been helping the Indian companies with. Was, I understand what your product does. Now, can we rephrase this in such a way that it appeals to the person that'll actually buy the product, as opposed to the person who will use the product? And I think that might be one of the slight shifts that I've observed. But that's a light of observation, so don't beat me up too badly for it.
No, of course not. That's a wonderful, in fact, observation. Just one question also came to my mind as a curiosity. You were mentioning about the employee engagement, right? And you mentioned about the higher side is around hardly 30%, a little more than 30%. So if this is the scenario across the globe in different countries, what are the possible reasons, according to you, that this is so low? Because the productivity of an organization is defined by the engaged employee. It is they who performed and built the institution. So what is your say on that? What's the reason for?
I think when I've dug into that survey a couple of times, one of the best things that I discovered was one of the best predictors of employee engagement was manager engagement. That there's, I think, a lacking layer of first line management. And it's an area I'm very interested in doing more research into. And I'm talking to a few people about trying to find a way of doing a better job of researching first line managers. And if the first line managers aren't positively engaged and actively interested in what the company is doing, the people below them won't be either. And I think you just get into people that are in the job, because they know they have to be in the job, but they have lost the fire. They've lost the desire to build and grow, and potentially even build and grow their career. And I do think that's part of the problem that Japan has seen, because they have had such a stagnant economy. Upward mobility has been very difficult for employees. So once you don't see upward mobility, I think you see people stopping working hard. And again, if that manager above them isn't also looking up, they're not going to be looking below and trying to lift people up. That's why I like looking at that GDP growth as one of the measures when you're thinking about where you want to expand to in different places. And it's one to keep an eye on. Unless, of course, you have a magnificent niche product that fits well into some of those other scenarios.
Understandable.
I have a short point. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Charles, to bring out these important aspects of global marketing, because I have worked in Dubai for about 9 years, and I can actually reciprocate everything you talked about in different nations. And like the same companies which are operating in India, when they operate in the Middle East, the way of operation has to be different. Like the MBA classes I was teaching there, almost 90% of students were Emiratis. Now, Emirati way of behavior, Emirati way of even like greetings, and whether you can to talk, like here we talk about our children, there you can't even, there are some restrictions in that. You have to be very, very sensitive to their what is acceptable in that country or not. So when you are in the marketing domain, the first thing is to train them is how to talk to an Emirati, how to talk to them, and how to understand their cultural nuances. For example, even the marketing cycles are different. Like in the Ramadan month, when there is a 1 month of fasting and all, the sales take place usually, I mean, till late in the evening. And you have a Sunday, which is a working day, and Friday, which is a holiday, and things are different. And you have to understand and reciprocate in that. 15% of the population of UAE is Emiratis, 85% of different nations, including, of course, we have nations from Europe and USA and Philippines and India and Pakistan. And all of these people are your customers. And there are different segmentation. So some part of UAE has a more gathering of one kind of a nationality, and some other parts, other nationalities stay. Even the marketing platforms, they are different in those. So very important that once you are selling in different nations with different cultural aspects and all, this is a very important aspect, because otherwise you can't reach out to that and get acceptability in that audience. So it's a very important topic, and I'm happy that you have shared this with our students. And having worked somewhere outside, I can reciprocate that very well then. Thank you.
I taught a class for a few days in Dubai, and I know experienced a lot of that, and that was an actual interesting one to me, because I taught there, and then I taught another one in Kuala Lumpur. I taught the same class in both places, and when I got to Kuala Lumpur, the difference in questions. In Dubai, the questions got into dealing with pricing the product when their primary product is petroleum, that were in my class, and the fact that, of course, it's when it's being shipped in a pipeline, it expands, and they sell by the weight, but it expands because of the heat, and how should they do that? And I said, that's a finance question. That is not my area. But also they said, what should we do when we can't ship to a nation because there's a strike and the ports are closed, and that makes a sales rep miss their numbers? And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting, business challenge to deal with. In Malaysia, it was how do we account for the need for, unfortunately, almost bribery, is what the person said. Well, we have to pay off the police to keep our streets open, so that the power is fixed. And I said, I'm not allowed to comment on bribery as an American. We're supposed to, we always have to have somebody else do that. So yes, I agree. And it's so easy in the initial conversation to go off on the wrong foot, and then it's so difficult to ever recover. And that's why I'll again emphasize, I said that I still felt one of the best things was having a local partner, and we worked with a local partnership in Japan. And even when I went into the UK, for the first hires, I went through local people that I knew over there that are UK citizens to help me get my initial staff in, so that I would make sure that we had that right advisory to do the cultural translations and the local business practice translations.
That's great. Students, so that's a final call. If you have any question, would you like to ask any? Is there anybody? Okay, then Dr. Ankita, over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was actually very, I would say, pleasure to hear Mr. Eric and his experience related to work, related to employee retention, and related to, I just heard about the bribery thing. I do agree there is so many things going around the world. With this, I would like to thank Mr. Eric, but before that, I would now request Dr. Raghavendra Kumar Sharma, Associate Dean Academics, to propose vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ankita, for letting me have this opportunity to thank our today's guest. It was quite interesting session, sir. When you were mentioning about the differences in the domestic and the global markets, right? How or what type of measures should be taken into account when an organization is moving from the domestic to the global level. Quite interesting to know about employee engagement and few other things which you spoke about. I would like to convey my sincere thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, who always extended the support and all type of cooperation that we need to organize such kind of events. My sincere thanks to Mr. Eric to spare time from his busy schedule. I understand, sir, it must be midnight at your place. I always find him very cooperative and very accommodating my request. Sometimes my weird request, as today's one. Delivering a lecture at the midtime is not that easy task, particularly after a very hectic day. So thank you very much, Mr. Eric. My appreciation and thanks to our director, IBS, Dr. Shantanu Roy, who come forward to let us have such kind of events and support as and when we need it. Thank you very much for guiding us, sir. I'm really thankful and appreciating the efforts made by Dr. Ankita Verma for convening this event. My friend from the faculty, Dr. Sohail. My sincere thanks to the IT fellow in the department, because in absence of their active participation and proactive participation, rather, I should say, such kind of online interventions are almost impossible. Last but not the least, I would like to appreciate the involvement of the students also. They have very patiently listened to this very interesting session. I'm sure they must have a lot of takeaways from this session. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks a lot. I believe Mr. Eric will not mind if we bother him in the future also to deliver a couple of sessions and maybe to get benefit of his experience and the exposure that he has.
Always happy to contribute. I fully expect to see more and more Indian companies coming into the US. So it's always good to be friends with the new competition.
Will be great. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much once again. We can close the meeting now. Lalit, Divyam,